Hi and welcome. This episode is for all of you trying to figure out PR and how to engage with media in your companies. Our guest today is a PR professor, and she's going to talk to us about all different things. She'll talk to us about messaging and how that carries through PR. She'll talk to us about some different strategies for owned, earned, and bought channels within PR and media relations. And then one of the really interesting topics we run through is what it looks like to target some of those micro influencers that may run a YouTube channel or host a specific podcast that really matters to your niche B2B audience. And then finally, we'll talk about how generative AI is changing or not changing public relations. I love this episode because if you're hiring new grads for public relations or media relations or even just corporate communications, you'll get a peek into what you can expect from them just coming out of college. So listen up.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, True Marketing. True is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit truemarketing.com. And now on with our podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Content Marketing Engineered. I'm Morgan Norris, hosting again for Wendy Covey as she's off on vacation to celebrate with her daughter who just graduated from college. I think they're in the Italian countryside right now. I handle our brand strategy here at True Marketing, and today I'm joined by Sam Heimbach, who is now teaching in the public relations field at Texas State University. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, Morgan. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to catch up with you today. I want to learn just a little bit more about what you're doing at Texas State and what you're there for, and then a little bit about what you see in the field of PR and where you see PR heading in the years to come. So kick us off by just talking a little bit about your career. We worked together in the past for a little bit. Talk a little bit about your career and then where you are now with your work at Texas State.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, I was super fortunate to have the chance to work with the True crew in the past. I started my career working in PR and marketing with a big focus on tech PR. So B2B, science, some consumer tech too. And then eventually kind of pivoted or transitioned into working in more of the higher ed space. And just this past year, I became an assistant professor of practice at Texas State University, where I teach classes related to public relations, writing, and social media.
Love it. And you were in Austin and then in LA for a bit, and now back in Texas.
Back in Texas. So glad to be here. And of course, I have to give a shout out for Texas State. We have 2 campuses where we teach PR. So if we have any, listeners kind of in the Austin area, I teach in San Marcos and in Round Rock. So we're really excited to be growing that Round Rock campus too, where a lot of great employers are.
That's so great. Do most students pick a home campus or do your PR students go back and forth?
Students have the flexibility and option to take classes at both campuses if they major in mass communication or PR. I think eventually we will start to see students take a majority of their classes on one of those campuses. Mm-hmm. But right now, students can take them in either location. So it's really great for flexibility in our commuter students.
That's so great. And just for reference for people who aren't in Austin, Round Rock is like 20 miles north of us on the north side of Austin, a north suburb. They bleed together. Yeah. And then San Marcos kind of bleeds in from the south. And so really you're kind of encompassing that whole Austin area in Central Texas, which is great.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the courses that you're teaching. Who's taking these courses? What are the goals? And what are you kind of aiming for students to learn as they move through these courses?
Yeah, absolutely. So for students, we want to make sure they come out with all of the skills that employers are looking for. So students who are really great communicators, good at writing, who have some great critical thinking skills where you can talk to them about a business problem and they can help you arrive at a solution, who can learn new technology.
Mm.
So, our goal is to equip students with those skills that they'll need to get there. And so for our PR program, that means we have some really great classes related to writing, related to strategy, related to research and kind of
Mm.
data and analytics and how those can be used effectively in communications. And then, of course, we also have kind of like that capstone class where students take everything that they've learned and then they apply it to working with a real client in a real scenario and helping them reach their goals. And I just realized that I forgot to mention one of the classes that I teach, which is our social media for strategic communications class. So, knowing that social is such a huge part of
Yeah.
communication strategy now, we also, of course, have a class dedicated to that.
I
And
love that. Okay. So that really segues into my next question about just
awesome.
kind of how you've seen the PR landscape shift from kind of how you were taught to how
Yeah.
you're now teaching students. And I imagine like social media is one big leg that stands on. I think you're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
younger than me, but there was like no social media when I was in college and like learning,
Barely
right?
any. Yeah.
And then it was sort of Twitter at events was
Mm-hmm.
like the first foray for me early on in my career. But what kind of changes are you seeing, and what are you what are you kind of equipping students with that wasn't a thing a decade or two ago?
Yeah. Thank you. I think a lot of times in the past, public relations used to be almost synonymous with media relations.
Yeah.
And now I think it's expanded so much based on, how media is changing, but then also, what's possible through social media and through owned channels. So we're teaching students how to communicate messages
Hmm.
effectively and how to think about how to strategically communicate something based on your company's brand values, the goals of your business, all of these things. And once you know your company's brand values and you know your goals and you know who you want to reach, then we have to look at all of the different avenues for how to do that, which can be tricky to teach. So students coming out, they don't need to just know how to write a press release or how to pitch the media. They also need to know how to think really strategically about social media and writing for social and creating video content for social media. They need to be able to think about how to incorporate events into your communication strategy and just really all of those different channels and ways that you can reach your audience with a message. And it isn't, media relations is certainly a core component, but
Yeah.
it's not the only focus for PR professionals.
Yeah. That is quite a shift, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
I I majored in public relations.
Okay.
Um, my first job was really truly in that media relations team where
Mm-hmm.
you were pitching, you were coordinating, editor meetings, you're doing road shows and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can totally see the value, and actually where I've landed is more of this storytelling role. What's the story and how do we share it, right? We have to develop
Absolutely.
it and then figure out where it goes. Um,
It's really cool. We have alumni coming in, and for example, people graduating with their PR degree. We have folks that are specializing in influencer marketing and
yeah,
influencer events, and they work for a PR agency, or folks who maybe focus on analyst relations, or
yeah.
who focus in any number of areas where they still, of course, want to think about what's going to have traction and be interesting to the media and their
Mhm.
audiences. Um, but there's so many different ways to get there now.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned kind of the different opportunities between owned channels, and then maybe there are earned and paid channels for
Yeah.
brand exposure. Any thoughts on just kind of when those channels are most appropriate, and even thinking, kind of putting that B2B hat back on and
Hmm.
saying, which types of channels are best for those B2B types of kind of more complicated messages or companies? How do you start there? Where do you challenge people to go?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'm glad that you framed it by like thinking with your B2B hat on. Sometimes when I'm working with students, we will think about, consumer audiences first. I think that one thing to consider and to just be really honest with yourself about whether you are working in B2B or B2C, when you're considering how you might want to share a piece of information, is
Mm-hmm.
really how newsworthy this is.
Mm,
And so, something that we generally cover in our classes is thinking about, unfortunately, just because something might feel exciting to us as a company, it might not fit the same criteria for newsworthiness that an editor would have. And I think that that's probably one of the more challenging roles as a PR person, is sharing that feedback with someone.
yeah.
Um, and so when we think about newsworthiness, it needs to be something that's going to have an impact. It needs to be timely. It needs to be something that is going to matter to the audience of those readers, or sorry, to the readers of that
Yeah.
publication.
Right.
Um, and and the good news is if we have something that we want to share that maybe doesn't quite reach that level of newsworthiness from an editor's perspective, there are other avenues that we can go down, which is the good news.
So I see this a ton in like some of the corporate culture and corporate values types of stuff that B2B companies have. They might make a really complicated technology, but they've got this fun company, and they've got great engineers, they've got great employees, and they really stand behind that. But their audience, who are maybe design engineers working in a silicone fab, don't care that their work environment is fun. And so a
Yeah.
lot of times people will want to they'll want to promote that, and they'll want people to talk about that, but the right forum for that ends up being in recruiting channels, and
Mm-hmm.
how we present your company at a recruiting fair to the
Yeah.
audience of new hires, new grads, right? Not to
Mm-hmm.
an editor. An editor doesn't care about that. They're not going to put that in their trade publication.
Right.
Um, but
Well,
that I love that point.
yeah. Well, also, like, where is your audience going to be looking for that? And to your point, like, they are going to receive that information a, much more effectively when you're reaching them in a channel where they'll be looking for that, like recruiting
Yep.
events, or, Glassdoor or Indeed or
Yeah.
LinkedIn can all be part of your PR and communication strategy too, because that's a huge part of your brand as an employer and company.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Um,
great.
and so along with, in addition, and so earned, we think a lot about, media relations, but
Yep.
earned media can also be, working with different, like, quote unquote influencers in your
Hmm.
space. So but essentially someone who's an authority on a topic, or like well respected on a certain
Hmm.
topic, who has their own audience that they reach in some way. So
Yeah.
whether that is connecting with someone who has a really effective podcast on a topic that
Yeah.
is, great for your company to speak on, or someone who has a large social following on certain channels that you might be able to connect with there. Um, there are lots of different avenues for earned media and reaching audiences in different ways.
Yeah. I like that. Thinking outside the box of who are the people and the voices that matter. I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we get caught up in the B2B space of trying to find who's the person with the biggest kind of following, but if you've got the right person and they have the right audience, that's a great candidate for you. Even if that audience is small, if it's really targeted to what you need, that's a good win for you. And we see that in paid when you have actual conversions, and you can see the conversions on, we targeted to this, hyper targeted, LinkedIn ad, or we paid to sponsor something in this very specific publication. And though it doesn't have a large circulation, the conversion was really, really high because it was the right people.
You see that on the consumer side too, when you think about like brands working with micro influencers. And then, certainly like, as you alluded to, there can also be a lot of overlap now in terms of like paid media and earned, in the sense that, you might work on some really great sponsored content where you're asserting yourself as a thought leader and also generating some great leads. So
I had definitely seen an uptick in the last maybe 12 months of reputable publications willing to pick up really well-written, contributed content for kind of the earned media purpose. You're owning that message. You're actually doing all the legwork and writing it, and then handing it over. And there's not a financial exchange there, but there is a lot of time and effort. But I think in the realm of just kind of like generative AI and lots of content being out there, there is a craving for really good content that comes from strong subject matter experts. And so just something kind of we've seen pick up recently.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited. I had a feeling we were going to get into some talk around generative AI. And so I'm glad that kind of this is the way that we came into it, because I think high quality and trustworthy content is going to become even more important as we see more content be generated through an LLM or AI.
For sure. I mean, I do it as a consumer, right? Like, I don't want to read this just junk that's, you can tell the cadence of it and stuff if it was generated to some extent. I mean, if it's excellent and it was generated, then great. But a lot of it is mediocre and you can tell really quickly. And I know that that's not what I want to read. I want someone's voice who's actually touched and lived and tried this product, or, experienced this company. So
yeah, and I know that you all have provided some great kind of recommendations and feedback on that topic.
Yeah, we're trying to just kind of stay on top of it. So we have to, right, for ourselves as an agency, but then we also need to be able to, so that we work efficiently, right? But we also need to be able to inform our clients too of how to kind of approach it, what you need to disclose, what works well, what doesn't, and be kind of an advisor there. So that's a good one. I have more questions on generative AI, but I want to save them.
Okay.
And I want to stick really quick. We started talking about social channels.
Yeah.
And social channels have kind of allowed companies to more easily put their own thought leaders and influencers out there in the real world. And I want to hear how you've seen this affect journalism and PR. And what I mean by that is, start of my career, we would pitch the, head of engineering or the head of R&D of this certain sector of our company to write this article in a large publication. The publication would accept the abstract. We would kind of ghostwrite it with the help of that SME and be able to create this really great piece of content and submit it. And it has that really, really top tier person's name on it. Now what's happening is you've got people who have been working at a company for a year and they've got a voice, they've got a platform, they've got LinkedIn to share on, they've got maybe it's like Reddit forums where they're talking about what they're doing. What does it look like for PR to have all of these different voices at different levels?
I think there are like a couple different lenses that can be viewed through. And so I think if we're thinking about PR from the standpoint of reputation, or if we're thinking about it, from the standpoint of like expressing company values and how you're employees play into that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are some pros and cons to the
Mm-hmm.
rise of social media.
Yeah.
So employee voice is definitely a part of company brand. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the companies that have had the most success are the companies who have leaned into that,
Mm.
because you have customers at different ages, or, potential customers at some
Yeah.
point, at different ages and different stages of their career, whether they're a customer now or they could be in the future. Um, and so I think the ability to have someone highlight your company or their experience there or their knowledge can be a huge asset to a company, if you kind of lean out a little bit and give
Right.
employees space to do that. I think that there's, a lot of great potential there. And of course, that also comes with, you do have to let go of some control. So there's always some trade-off there from a PR perspective, if we're talking about reputation and brand.
Right. Right.
Um, if we're talking about more of like the reach or the media relations impact of it, I think it can also be really exciting in the standpoint of, sometimes you'll see journalists sourcing social media, whether it's looking for new topics or looking for quotes on different
Mm-hmm.
matters. You'll see social media posts embedded in so many stories. And so, again, it can be a really great opportunity and an asset. If all goes well, it can be a really great
Yeah.
asset and opportunity. And so, with that in mind, I think that as a PR professional, it's really important to be doing a lot of listening, a lot of digital listening, a lot of social media listening. If you have a role where you're part of like the company's brand management
Mm-hmm.
or issues management, it can be really helpful to just kind of monitor what's happening in your industry and the space, and then of course any mentions of your company as well. I'm
Yeah.
not sure, is that aligned at all with what you were asking,
Yeah.
Morgan?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's really helpful. And to that point, I didn't prep you with this, but are there any listening tools that you
Oh.
like or would recommend? I know there are a few that we've used in the past. We've had clients who use different ones, but are
Mm-hmm.
there any that you like or you teach to or you like for different
Sure.
things?
So there aren't any that I would necessarily, I don't want to personally recommend like a
That's fair.
specific
That's totally
brand,
fair.
but there are so many great options out there. And
Yeah.
I would say for B2B brands specifically, I would say to just kind of take some due diligence and looking at the price point and then what you'll get
Mm-hmm.
for it, because there are a lot of great social listening and social media posting tools out there. And you can find some that are in a good price point for you. Just it's important to shop around a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, and I think functionality is important too. Are you using the tool to just listen or do you need something to manage lots and
Yeah,
lots of posts? And so um I know I always start at a bare minimum with like we need to set you up with some Google alerts just so you don't miss any news. Like just let's
definitely.
not miss any news, anything that Google classifies as news. Let's make sure we catch that. But then I know
Hmm.
there's tools like Talkwalker and Hootsuite, things like that, that have varying degrees of pricing structure and functionality, like you mentioned. And a
Absolutely.
lot of times companies are pretty small, or B2B kind of technology companies are small enough, and there's not an insane amount of chatter about them, like there might be about consumer brands, that
Hmm.
even just doing some LinkedIn searches or Reddit searches is enough at first to kind of stay on top of what's happening before you even jump into some paid tier structure of a platform.
Yeah, and it can be
Um,
fun to listen to what competitors are maybe doing, or
yeah,
even just kind of like some key terms or areas within your industry that you might want to follow along.
Yeah, I'm going to note that because I'm doing a bunch of competitive research for a client coming up and just making sure that I'm listening on all the platforms. I think a lot of times when we go to just get a pulse on a competitor, the first thing we do is we look at what they say about themselves on their own website. But how can we take a step back and go, what's everybody else saying? What are people hearing? We've talked a little bit about kind of like micro influencers that aren't traditional journalists that fall into that media relations bucket. What about when you have students go sort of research? I know what it looks like to research a standard media list, right? I can go to publication websites. I can find they make journalist contact information very prevalent. What does it look like to reach these kind of non-traditional journalists or influencers? How do you even find them? How do you decide which ones are worth kind of pursuing from that perspective? What does that look like?
I can tell you at a high level what I might recommend.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in, influencer relations. So someone who is might have,
Sure.
better advice than I do. But at a really high level, I would say it's interesting because a lot of people are using social media more for search. And, it'll be interesting to see kind of what's all, continue to be pulled in and brought into search results from like using LLMs for search too. So I think, the first step for me would be researching potentially the topics. You can have your kind of traditional media list, but it might also look like researching topics on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, if that's a channel that would interest that client, on Spotify or like other kind of podcast channels, and maybe going from there and evaluating, of course, the person, that individual, like the way that they approach these different topics. Is it something that aligns with your brand? Do they talk about this topic and industry in a way that fits with your values and kind of how you see the future of this moving? And then also, of course, like what's their reach? What kind of following do they have? And it, again, to your point, it doesn't always have to be super large if it's reaching the right audience for your brand. And from there, I would say if you decide to move forward with contacting people, it's realizing or recognizing that for some people, they might be doing this in addition to their full-time job, or it might be some form of a source of income for them or not. So just understanding that from my point of view, this still would be an earned media opportunity. So it's being very respectful and working with them, having patience and having that expectation that, this is their channel and their brand as well. So understanding that we can speak with them, but we can't control necessarily what that person or influencer might do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think as we start to kind of engage with different podcasts for clients or YouTube channels and things like that, you definitely find, I think the point you made of this might be something they're doing on the side or something that they're is like a small stream of income for them or something like that. And I find that a lot. And I think people are grabbing onto different forms of content and trying to kind of find their niche. But sometimes it takes like 2 or 3 times of reaching out, or it's not like a silver bullet. Okay. So last official question. Tell me about generative AI. We started to touch on it, but I would love to hear your thoughts on just like, how do you feel like that's changing the PR landscape? What ways are you teaching generative AI, or are you not teaching it? How are you just interacting with it? Knowing we've got listeners who are, they might be VPs of sales and marketing at their companies, and they're expecting to hire students out of college. And what type of experiences are these kids like getting or not getting? What kind of expectation can we have? What does that look like from your perspective? And I feel like, I imagine this changes like monthly.
Yeah, no, thank you for that caveat, because I think, what's possible and what is capable of being produced by AI is constantly changing. And
Yeah.
so what we might talk about or say in this conversation could be totally different than what we might say 6 months from now. So I really appreciate that caveat. I would say at the very highest level, we want to teach students how to use AI as a tool and not a crutch throughout the process of creating something or evaluating something. And so, again, for companies, I think from my perspective or in my opinion, I think the companies that we're seeing be most successful are companies who are using AI additively and not as a replacement for anything. So, a human creativity and critical thinking and ethics, I think, are invaluable and definitely something we want to continue to have throughout that process of using or interacting with or engaging AI as part of our communications process or strategy. And so, from a PR perspective, I think something that is interesting, and this is very defining PR very broadly, as a way to share a message. I think that we'll continue to see more content. I think we've already started to see more content be generated by AI. I think media literacy is going to continue to be really important in the standpoint of, I think, unfortunately, a lot of times, like personally, because I, teach writing too, I'd like to think that I'm fairly good at detecting AI or when AI has been used, but I don't think we're probably as good at it as we think we are. I've had students tell me like, oh, I've never seen AI in my social media feed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you absolutely have seen AI in your social media feed. And so I think in terms of like, if we're thinking about a brand and how they might want to generate awareness or coverage of themselves, I think that, like what we talked about earlier, that idea of building trust with their audience and their followers by building really high quality content that has been fact checked or kind of validated by people within their organization is going to be so important.
Yeah.
Because I think that we have seen that, AI can generate information that isn't accurate. It can like hallucinate, as we would say. And then, on top of that, there was a study that found that I want to say like 80% of misinformation on social media was generated by a few top accounts. And so as we see more content and there's more of a risk for misinformation, I think it's just going to become even more important for us to kind of be able to differentiate ourselves and our clients by creating these really trustworthy channels, trustworthy content that, like I said, has been fact checked, validated by a human, someone who has hands-on experience and expertise in their field. I like to hope that consumers and our audience will be hungry for that. And in terms of teaching, for students, I think that similar to like how with math, we have calculators, but we still want to teach people how to add and we want to teach them about these concepts. I think that we still need to do that in other fields as well. So for our students, I teach a Foundations of PR writing class. And so we really focus on teaching students some of those foundations and then how we can use AI again as more of a tool for ideation or editing versus using it as something that we copy paste.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think programming tools are probably also a similar compare, right? Like we need to know the foundations of those and what is good code and what does it look like and how is it built before we let something just replicate over and over again.
I've heard that, with kind of analysts or data analysts as well. There are certain things that you might think to look for or know to look for as a human. There might be a pattern that you catch that AI might not. And so, so I think it's just still really important for us to understand those concepts. And again, be able to use AI as a tool and as part of the process versus having it replace certain things at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'll be really interesting to see as time goes on. But for now, it's even the B2B marketing space. I find that like the things that I consume on a weekly basis are very personalized by the subject matter expert. So I interviewed Chris Penn last week, and he has a newsletter every week, and he has an authenticity statement at the beginning of it of if any of it was generated by AI, or how he'll say this is 100% generated by me, a human, whatever. But that is what I gravitate to because there is a level of trust and authenticity there, like you said. And I think that does go a long way. And I was at the Macon Marketing AI conference last summer. And one of the things, I think it was Paul Reitzer that said, he said, AI can do so many things, and generating content, like words on a page, is one of the least compelling things that it can do. Like there's so much to be done with like the listening tools, right? And the metrics, and like, oh my gosh, someone please make a search engine to search podcasts that uses AI to, transcribe or listen, and then creates a very valuable podcast, because the podcast search tools are really terrible, in my opinion. It just seems like there's so many things that can be created, kind of products that can be created, and automations that can be created. Content is one of the least compelling of those because we are already quite good at doing it, I think.
What I will say is, we're talking about trust and, including this as part of your process and not, replacing anything. And, I do think that this could add a lot of value for smaller organizations that are looking to create different pieces of content or different things, like as a starting point. I think that it can also be this really great kind of like democratizer of content creation when done in the right way. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I do want to say some positives too.
There are huge benefits. But don't ask a generative tool to just write your press release from scratch.
Right. Yes. I can guarantee you I've had some students who do that, and I can tell you.
Your professor will know.
Professor will know.
Well, awesome, Sam. I would love to have you back in like a year or so and answer some of the same questions and see how things have changed as far as tools and trends, and then as well just kind of the different types of students and, like you said, kind of returning students coming back, how your experience has changed. So I really appreciate this.
I love it.
Thanks for being on today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It's so great to connect with the True Crew again.
Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit truemarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and our e-newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.